My boss assigned a schedule amongst our staff. I was unfortunately scheduled for the night shift on Fridays. I didn't usually mind as we didn't get a whole lot of business around this time of night. My boss was pretty laid back and didn't mind if I went on my phone during business hours, so long as I got all my work done. I remember dozing off repeatedly due to the fact that I wasn't fully acclimated with the night shift hours. Psst. That's when I heard someone making a psst sound, the kind of sound you make when you try to draw someone's attention. I notice a customer trying to make an order outside, so I quickly greet them with my usual, "Hi, welcome to McDonald's. May I take your order?" I then heard a man say, "One Whopper, please. Yes, I would like one Whopper, please." I couldn't tell if he was being a smartass or not, so I ended up saying, "This isn't Burger King, sir. We don't serve that here." I heard him chuckling profusely after I said that. I quickly checked the security camera, only to see a clown. The clown was standing in front of the drive-thru menu without a car. It's not Halloween, why the hell is this guy dressed up like that? I really didn't want to serve this guy, so I decided to use our company policy as a plausible excuse for him to exit the premises. "Hi, sir. Unfortunately, you need to be in a vehicle in order to purchase something here." "If you don't have a Whopper, I'll take a Baconator instead." I now could tell this guy was some random psycho harassing me. I instinctively yelled, "Get the hell out of here before I call the cops!" I cautiously stick my head out the window, only to see the clown no longer there. A couple hours later, near the end of my shift, I notify my boss and fellow employees regarding the situation. They all dismiss my accusations by saying ignorant things like, "Did you get his autograph?" Or, "It was probably some guy that thought it was Halloween." I annoyingly pretend to be amused and head home. The following Friday, it was my time to work the night shift again. I really dreaded working this shift, especially after what transpired that day. I tried to convince myself that it would be highly unlikely that I'd encounter that clown again. As time went on, I remember dozing off as I get startled by another psst sound. I urgently check the security camera, but don't see anyone present. At this point, I genuinely thought I was hearing things due to my subconscious mind thinking about the clown. My paranoia must have been at the peak of its height. That's when I turn my head towards the drive-thru window, only to see the clown staring dead at me. "If you don't make me a Big Mac, I will kill you. Trevor." My heart sank to my stomach. The clown knew my name. I immediately grabbed my cell phone to call the cops, but my hands were trembling so much that I actually wasn't capable of dialing anything. The clown started banging his head on the glass while screaming my name, Trevor, repeatedly. "Trevor, Trevor, Trevor, I am not loving it! Trevor, 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 Trevor!" I see blood dripping down from his head. I started shouting from the top of my lungs, "Leave me alone or I will call the cops!" The clown runs away as another car approaches the drive-thru lot. I stupidly resume work and wait for my boss to come in. Upon his arrival, I explain the entire situation to him. He then dismisses me by saying, "Don't sweat it, kid. It was probably some drunk. You can go home now." As he was talking, I noticed a cut on his forehead. I could even see blood start to drip from it. No. It can't be. "Goodbye, Trevor." No!
Christy, sabi mo hangout tayo. Puro ka naman games eh.
Sabi ko naman kasi sa'yo, subukan mo. Have you ever played with a corpse? It happened when I was a little kid, just before when I was about to enter kindergarten. I went to the small valley with my family, grandparents, and my relatives. I was such a brave child as I was too young at the time. Just relying on my little swim tube, I used to play alone deep in the valley water without wearing a life jacket and come out and eat watermelon. My siblings were a little older than me, but being scared, they didn't come in. So I always hid them and then went into the water to tease them. And the adults were sitting on a low wooden bench near the valley just watching us. After eating lunch, I got bored again. I think it was about after 5 or 6. I went back to the water to play alone. Thinking back, it was totally crazy. I was circling about with my head crammed in a tube carelessly. I was in a situation where I might die right away if the tube flips, but I was just looking up at the sky and thinking that the clouds were pretty at that time. Then, suddenly, the center of my swim tube was shaken a little bit. That was the moment. A girl who looks like a middle school student suddenly grabbed my arm. Her lips looked slightly purple, as if she had been playing in the water for a long time. Then she smiled and said, as if she was reassuring me, "You're gonna fall off. Grab it tightly." She looked kinda older than me, and I was just excited about the thing that she's gonna stay and play with me for a while. So I grabbed the tube and then I swam with her. While she dragged my tube, I couldn't even realize what time it is now. I had so much fun with her. About an hour later, she started to take me to a shallow place near the riverside. "It's going to be cold soon. I'll take you to the adults," she said. But at that moment, my grandmother suddenly screamed and kept shouting my name. She was very old and she didn't even come into the water, but she hurriedly came into the water with her socks on, and she lifted me up and then ran out. "Grandma, what's wrong? What happened?" I shouted. But as soon as I came out of the water, my family tried to cover my eyes so I couldn't see the valley. And my grandma was crying while saying that I was possessed by a ghost. I remember going to a temple or shaman's house for a while after that. A few years later, I asked my grandmother what happened that day, and what she told me was a pure shock. The moment my grandmother looked at the valley to see if I was playing well alone, she saw that I was talking to myself while giggling, and something black got stuck at the end of my tube and was wobbling together. Wondering what I was so funny about, she put glasses on to see me and that black thing. And at that moment, she saw that I was swimming around holding someone's black and long hair. Her heart sank, and as she decided to approach me quickly, she then saw the dead body slowly coming up. That's why she ran towards me. Now that I think about it, that memory didn't scare me at all, literally. However, I still can't forget the faces of those adults who saw the scene.
This story is about my grandfather's experience. He died a long time ago. After he was declared dead at the hospital, we took the body home and put it in his room because my grandmother wanted to see him a little more before saying goodbye to her husband. But then, something happened. 2 days later, the room door suddenly opened and my grandfather crawled out asking for water. Literally, my grandmother and all of the aunts just fainted, and only my uncles and my mom were barely awake. And I was just staring at this weird sight because I was too young at the time. I gave my grandfather a whole body massage after I brought him water, and on that day, the house was in chaos. A few months later, I went to my grandparents' house again, and he was so lively that I couldn't believe that he's the one who once died. One day I was sitting with my grandfather eating ice cream, and he started to tell me a story. On that day, my grandfather woke up in the hospital, and he noticed that everyone was crying. He asked them why they were crying, but no one answered, so he was just standing there. And then a man in a black suit called him outside the hospital room. Without time to think, he began following him, and he started to feel a little bit sad rather than scared. The crying sound from behind gradually decreased, and as he walked along with the man, he could see the village where he used to live as a child. There was a river at his feet that he had never seen before, and the river was really, really red, so he got goosebumps. The man was walking on the surface of the water, and he pressed my grandfather to come over quickly, so the moment he tried to follow him, he was also walking on the water. After crossing the river, he then saw a black wooden structure long past the wasteland. When he was about to pass the gate, a woman in black mourning came out from the inside and kicked him out, saying, "No, you brought the wrong person. If you want to live another 3 years of your life, go and ignore everyone you meet. Do not look back. Just follow the four-legged animal. The woman said like this and disappeared into the house with the man. So my grandfather was going back the way he came. And then he saw one of his friends who had died a few years ago standing there. He beckoned him to come closer, but my grandfather ignored him, thinking what the woman had said just before, even if his friend cursed at him. After that, he met other friends, but he ignored all of them and just passed by. The moment he arrived at the river again, there was a bridge that was not there before. At that moment, he saw his daughter, who had died of fever when she was young, standing in the bridge. He could not ignore his daughter. So he approached, and she stretched out her hand as if she wanted him to hold it for her. As soon as he was about to hold that hand, something pulled on his legs. When he looked down, he saw a white dog that had been raised by him a long time ago was biting his pants and dragging frantically as if he should not hold that hand. It's like he was telling him to cross the bridge immediately. He stepped back from his daughter quickly, and that was the moment when she suddenly rushed to him. Her mouth almost ripped to the ear, and she repeated like this, "I'm going to catch you. I'm going to take you." She was running toward him with a rope in her hand, and it was horrifying. He started to run toward the bridge, and the dog was barking at the ghost and guarded behind him. As soon as he crossed the bridge, that thing vanished with loud crying, and the dog was still barking as if he was telling him to hurry. He looked back when he was far away from the bridge, and then realized that the river, the bridge, the neighborhood, and the dog were all gone. The surrounding area was as white as a sheet. It was the moment when he finally opened his eyes, and he found himself lying in his bed. Grandfather also told this story to his local friends, and the oldest man told him a story that had been told by a shaman. There's a ghost that brings the dead who met with violent death, and he suggested that the ghost that Grandfather saw seemed to be that kind of type. If ghosts lack a place to live in the afterlife, they would take the dead to build a new house. Anyway, after that, my grandfather lived really well for the rest of the 3 years, as the woman in the dream had said, and then he passed away while taking a nap on the same day he first died, 3 years ago. After that, I kept recalling my grandfather's lonely face while he told me his story at that time. My grandfather was not the type who originally believed in ghosts. While he was alive, he always cut the weeds around the grave and brought some drinks and snacks for the grave's owners whenever he saw the ownerless graves around his town. This, of course, is just my grandfather's very personal experience, so it's okay to think of it as just a novelty story, because he told me exactly the same thing. I guess he absolutely went to heaven, but I just miss my grandfather.
Always on at any angle. Healthy glow yan ng Myra Moisturizer. Powered by 5 essential vitamins. Kaya di lang glowing, healthy glowing. Glow anytime, stand out all the time with Myra Moisturizer.
I live in Limburg. That is the most southern province of the Netherlands. I'm 20 years old, and all my life I've been wanting to work as a caretaker for people with a disability. Just a few months ago, my dream came true, and now I work as a full-time caretaker at a living facility in Maastricht. At this facility, my story takes place. The living facility is positioned just outside of Maastricht City. Before the building became a housing facility, it was a laundromat for the people living on that street. The facility consists of 3 houses that are internally connected. Each one can house 8 people. That makes a total of 24 patients that live in the facility. Each patient has his or her own room, ranging from small to large to a separate bathroom and kitchen to a shared bathroom in the hallway. I first began working at this facility when I was just 17 years old, as an intern for my education. The story starts 2 years ago, when one of my patients that had lived there for 3 years moved out to live at another facility. His family claimed that the patient did not feel safe in his room because he would hear knocking coming from his closet. We made our apologies for the inconvenience, but didn't think much of it. 1 month later, when the room was cleaned and disinfected, a new patient came to live in the empty room. It was an elderly man, who I'll just refer to as Rick. Rick was a warm and kind-hearted man who always loved talking about horses that he had as a child, as well as his great love for Russian opera. You'd always catch him sneaking into the kitchen to get a snack, or hear him sing opera. I must admit, he had quite a powerful and wonderful voice. At first, he would bid us a good night before he went to bed. But as time went by, Rick seemed more and more distressed. He didn't eat and didn't drink as much as he used to, and he lost weight at a troubling rate. He would sit quietly on the couch, staring blankly at nothing. When asked what was wrong, he would say that he had a terrible nightmare of some kind of creature lurking in his closet. My colleagues and I debated whether or not he could be getting Alzheimer's and would need testing for it. He had been tested, but nothing came out of those tests. Every night, Rick would scream us awake, and when we came into the room, he'd be sitting on his bed, trembling and pointing at the closet. He'd say that something crawled out of the closet and joined him in his bed. He described this creature as being skinny, even bony, with rotting meat hanging from its bones. The creature had green eyes, the same color as his deceased mother, and huge fingers that ended in claws. The creature's face was that of a human skull, those green eyes being nothing more than small lights, and a mouth that was filled with sharp teeth, like a crocodile. The creature would lie next to him in his bed, wrapping its claws around his body. Rick described so vividly how he could smell the horrible scent of decay as the creature opened his mouth to whisper in his ear, "Get out! This is not your home." Rick would cover his ears as he said that, and he would soil himself. Poor Rick. My colleague checked the closet, but there was nothing there, and the only thing we could say was that everything was going to be fine. Fast forward about a month later, and Rick would wake up with markings all over his body. Deep scratches that appeared to be claw marks. There were even bite marks that were deeper and more animalistic than any human bite. Rick would not want to go into his room anymore, and he would bring his dinner to his room and place it at the door of his closet. My colleagues would take the food away, much to Rick's horror. He'd say that we would make the creature angry, and if it was angry, it would punish him. I feel so sorry for him, especially seeing the fear in his eyes as we scolded him and took away the plate.
Before making it big, I got my first break on TV as an actress. 11 pa lang ako noon.
There was 2 weeks of this, the same thing happening with Rick. One of my closest colleagues and I were working the night shift one night. We were making our usual rounds, checking if everyone was sleeping, and all the machinery was still up and running. That was when we heard a horrible, bone-chilling scream echo through the building. The scream came from Rick's room. We stormed in, throwing the door open hard, revealing a horrible sight. Rick was lying on his back in his bed, while he was grasping for air. He was clawing at his neck and chest, ripping the flesh off, making bloody gashes all over his upper body. His bed and himself were covered in blood, and there was a trace of blood leading to his closet, which which was now slightly open. My colleagues dialed 112. That's the emergency line in the Netherlands. While I desperately tried to stop Rick from clawing, the only thing Rick did was scream, as if possessed, and stared at the ceiling. After what seemed like forever, the ambulance came and took Rick away. A week later, we received the sad news that Rick had died. The room once again was left empty. The blood was cleaned up by a cleaning company and the room would be occupied soon enough. But even before the room was occupied, I found another patient standing in the room in front of that closet. "Hey, what are you doing in here?" I asked her as I walked into the room. The patient had stared at me and had muttered, "This room should not be occupied ever again. It is angering him." Who's him?" I asked with a shaky voice. "You know who I mean. The devil who lived in the closet." After she said that, she walked out of the room and left me breathless. 2 weeks later, that same patient moved into the room. I don't know why she was placed in that room, but I do know that she too changed. She can't remember her own name now, and all she does is sit in front of that closet, talking to the devil. I don't know what's going on at my work, but strange things keep happening. Colleagues tell stories of hearing footsteps in the hallways. Others hear whispers, and one even claimed to have been attacked by a shadow demon. Whatever's going on, one thing is for sure. The creature in the closet is real, and he's not happy about our patient living in his room.
Back in the 70s, when I was a teen...
Commercial break po muna. Shout out daw kila Siren Diquilia, kay Hi Jessa, kay Jessa din, and then kay Jan Melchor Basco. Hi! Di ko alam ba't gising pa kayo. Puyat na. Sana tapos na kayo sa requirements. Yun lang. Okay, back to the video.
Teenager. I had a girlfriend named Daisy who was a neighborhood babysitter. Everyone on my block used her to watch their kids when they would go out. There was no need for her to have a regular job because she made good money babysitting. I would usually stop by after the kids went to sleep and hang out with her until the parents got back, where I'd quietly make my exit and wait for her outside to walk her home. I remember that this was a couple of days after Halloween 1977. I'll never forget that year's Halloween, because that was the night I was clipped by a drunk driver while I was riding my bike. The guy ended up going to jail, but that's another story. The point is, I would not be visiting Daisy that night because of my broken arm and fractured rib, but she said that she would call me after the kids went to sleep. So I spent the evening in my living room watching television, waiting for Daisy to call me. I would say it was around 8:30 when the phone rang. Hello.
Hey, it's me.
What's up, babe? Did the little rascal finally pass out?
Yeah, Mrs. Clark let him eat all of his leftover candy before I got here, and he was bouncing off the walls for a while.
Sounds like fun.
Totally. But it's pretty funny to see little Dennis when he's all hyper. He talks so fast that it sounds like he's speaking another language.
Is that so?
Yeah, but anyway, how's your arm?
It still sucks. Itches like crazy. And when I try to scratch at it, I end up moving it. And that's when I feel the pain come back.
Ooh, jeez.
Yeah, tell me about it. I'm just grateful it's my left arm, and that my dad does a really bad job of hiding his dirty magazines.
Oh, shut up, you perv.
So, what are you wearing?
I'm not answering that. Use your imagination.
Be careful what you wish for. I might just...
Shh. I think I heard something outside.
Very funny, Daisy.
No, I'm serious. I think I just heard someone walking around outside.
I could tell by the sound of her voice, Daisy was a little creeped out. Maybe the Clarks are home?
No, they said they wouldn't be back until 9 a.m. tomorrow. I'm staying the night here.
Okay, don't freak out. Maybe it's just a stray cat or something.
It didn't sound like a cat. Just stay on the phone with me while I go check it out.
Okay. A couple of seconds went by, and the next thing I heard was the sound of glass shattering followed by Daisy screaming at the top of her lungs. And the line went dead. I quickly got up, left my house, and made my way over to the Clark's residence as quickly as I could. They lived at the very end of the block, so it took me about 5 minutes to get there. When I arrived, the front door was open, and I could see Daisy lying face down on the living room floor in a pool of blood. I quickly got to her and turned her over with my good arm. She had been stabbed in the chest. At first, I thought Daisy was dead, but I soon realized she was just unconscious. I applied pressure to her wound and looked behind me to see that Dennis was by the stairs. He had a look of absolute terror on his face. "Dennis, buddy, I need you to call the police. Tell them that someone broke in and attacked Daisy." I actually knew Dennis very well. My dad and his dad were very good friends. So Dennis wasn't afraid of me, and he also wasn't a complete moron like most kids on my block. He did what he was told. While I was trying to stop the bleeding, I happened to see that one of the large living room windows had been completely shattered. That was where the attacker must have entered, and then left through the front door. The police and ambulance showed up a few minutes later, and Daisy was rushed to the emergency room. The police contacted the Clarks to explain the situation, and Dennis ended up staying at my house until they got back. When Daisy finally came to, she was hysterical and could not tell the police any details about her attacker. It was completely random. Nothing like this had ever happened in my neighborhood before. This incident pretty much destroyed our entire community. Nobody trusted anyone after this. A rumor even started that I was the one who attacked Daisy that night. Unfortunately, Daisy ended up suffering from mental complications brought on by the trauma of this event. Our relationship fell apart, and she moved away a year later. I'm sad to say that she developed a drug addiction, which led to her taking her own life in 1983. The police never found out who the intruder was or what his motives were. Nothing from the house had been taken. It's truly a shame that they never caught the person. Because of their actions, they destroyed a wonderful community. And I can't imagine the anguish that Daisy's parents went through watching their daughter turn from a happy, normal girl into an emotional wreck. It's sad, but this is the world we live in. I don't advocate that you live your life in fear. That's not healthy. But be aware that there are people out there who are just pure evil. And sometimes, they don't have a reason for doing the horrible things they do.
Back when we moved into our house, we were introduced to all of our neighbors by them coming to our house with cookies or brownies, kind of like they do in the movies. This was a nice, quiet, middle-class neighborhood, made up of mostly older white people and new families. I mention that because we were the only black family in the neighborhood. No black wives, husbands, not even adopted children. We didn't really find it strange though. It was just very clear that we were different. I was about 13 years old at the time, and my brother was 15. Our backyard was about a half an acre and is fenced, but it's also connected to two other houses' backyards. Each one is about half the size of ours, but we all have separating fences. So to paint a picture, there's a T-shaped fence separating our backyards. The house to the left was the home of an older man named Tom. He kind of reminded me of Willie Nelson, but without the cool pigtails. He liked to be outside shirtless and usually with a denim vest, no matter what the weather was. He was a pretty well-built man, but visibly kind of frail. We actually found him to be quite funny, in a creepy old guy type of way. As I got older, he had started to make comments. I played in the backyard with my dogs a lot, and Tom could see me in his living room window that faced his backyard. Whenever I glanced over, I could always see him in the window, just standing there watching me. When he noticed that I saw him, he'd come out and talk to me. I would try to get away before he would come out, but sometimes I was just too slow. I didn't want to make it too obvious, so I would just walk. But if I didn't make it inside, he'd yell for me to come back. I never got too close to the fence, though. I'd speak from a distance. He would ask me about school, what grade I was in, tell me I was pretty, and ask if I was old enough to have a boyfriend. Also, if I had an older sister or older friends that looked like me. It was pretty weird, but I'd just laugh it off. But after a few questions, he'd stop talking to me and just stare at me, silently. I would always give an excuse about needing to go inside, and he would nod and stand at the fence and just watch me walk back into the house. This kind of thing happened almost weekly. My mom really loves to decorate, so she changes the house decor every few months or so. It's pretty annoying, actually. During one of her designing sprees, she had decided to get a new sliding glass door for the back porch, which required her to take the curtains down in the living room. It took forever to get them installed, but she figured that there was no point in putting the curtains back up if we'd have to take them back down again. Fine, I guess. Now, our family TV was in the living room. I didn't have a TV in my room, so I'd often watch TV late into the night in the living room with my brother. One night, my brother went to bed pretty early, so I decided to watch TV by myself that night. Right around midnight or so, I had turned off the TV so I could go to bed. I got up from the couch, turned off the light, and then turned around to see another light on. Not in my house, but in Tom's house. It was in his living room, and he was there, just standing in the window watching me. I later told my parents about it, but they just shrugged it off. I'm a pretty anxious soul, so I often just chalk things up to my anxiety. Fine. Not too long afterwards, though, my dogs had started to get sick. I would take them out to play and they'd start throwing up or have diarrhea. We knew that it wasn't their food because we didn't give them anything new. We also threw away the dog treats that we recently bought, just in case that was the problem. But it didn't stop. I had started to notice that every time I let them out alone, they'd always run straight over to Tom's fence, jumping up and down and wagging their tails. He would slowly walk outside, reach over the fence, and then feed them his treats, which was really odd because Tom didn't even have a dog. I told my parents, and my dad went to talk to him, telling him the dogs were getting sick. Tom had apologized, and he had also stopped feeding them, and they got better. A few weeks later, I was coming home from school. My brother was in the grade above me, and I was a senior, so he was in college at the time. Whenever I got home, no one else would be home for a few more hours. I had a routine. I would put my book bag downstairs, then change clothes, let the dogs out of their cages on the porch, get a snack, and then let them back in. For some strange reason, I was just unusually excited to see my dogs that day. So instead of going upstairs, I went straight to the back porch. I had got to the door to open it, and I then saw Tom just sitting on the ground right in front of the dogs' cages. I froze. He didn't see me, though. I looked over to see if the door was locked, but it wasn't. I began to lock it as slowly as possible so it didn't make a noise, but it did. Tom then looked over and he saw me standing there. I ran upstairs to go call my parents. My mom's a nurse, so she didn't have her phone on. And my dad just never answered the phone. I didn't really think that it was serious enough to call the police, so instead I just hid. After about a moment, though, I had then heard Tom knock on the door. It wasn't loud or aggressive, though. It was almost like friendly, like he just wanted to talk. I tried my dad's phone yet again, and he then answered. I was crying hysterically, and I had then told him that Tom was on the porch. He said he'd head home, but he was about an hour away. I just sat in my room, just waiting for my dad. The knocking stopped. All I remember was that my dad got home and Tom was gone. I don't really know what happened between Tom and my dad, but he did stop coming outside and talking to me. He never did stop watching, though, always standing in his living room. Sometimes I'd see him through the window and he would wave at me, but always with the light on, just so I knew that he was still there. It was pretty creepy.
I grew up in what people would consider a bad household. My mom and dad were in a bad relationship, and they did nothing but argue every day. My mom would complain that my dad would stick in the basement almost every day and never spend any time with me. And my dad would always have the same response, that he's doing research down there. The only problem was that we were prohibited from going down to the basement. 3 locks were built into the basement door, and he kept his one key on his old key ring. The key had a torn blue sticker at the bottom of it with a brown rusty tip. However, my mom finally got a hold of it somehow. And that same day when I came home from school, Dad suddenly told me she left us for another man. He seemed truly broken and sunk in his misery. So I tried pretending to be normal at first. But I couldn't stop crying like a baby when I finally got back in my room. After a few months of emotional breakdowns, my dad finally got over it. Furthermore, he started to visit the basement more consistently to the point where I would feel like I lived alone. I kept thinking my dad was working very hard, since I saw him being very distraught after coming upstairs from the basement. I thought everything was fine, until I started hearing noises at night. They weren't just regular noises. It was kind of someone's crying and scream of agony. But the most disturbing sound of all was the sound of growling, like some kind of beast would exist down in the basement. The next morning I complained to my dad, but he acted like he had no idea what I was talking about as he walked past me to get ready for work. So I just shook it off, assuming that he was watching some horror movie down there, or if I was just imagining the whole thing. I went back to my room. As it was the weekend, I was ready to catch up on some Saturday morning cartoons. I turned on my TV, and as I got ready to change the channel, I heard a familiar name. The news reporter was naming over 40 missing people in our town, and my mom was one of those names as they briefly showed her picture and information. I was confused about who would file a missing person report for her, because my grandparents both died in a tragic car accident years ago. She had no siblings, and my dad told me she left us for another man. I wanted to inform my dad, but soon I was concerned it would make him depressed again. And in a way, I was still angry at her for leaving us. So I ignored it and changed the channel. A few minutes later, my dad came in to tell me he was leaving for work. He gave me a kiss on my forehead and informed me that he'd be back later that night. After he left, I invited my best friend Austin to come over. He then arrived shortly after, and we played a game on my PlayStation. As we were about to plunge into the game, we suddenly heard a strange noise coming from the basement. "What was that?" Austin asked, being confused. "I don't know. My dad does some kinds of experiments down there. It's probably a rat or something." Austin looked amused. "No, dude, we can't go down there. My dad said so," I said quickly, bringing an end to Austin's excitement. It has no reason to doubt that Austin was disappointed. Then he asked for something to drink, so I went to the kitchen to get some juice for him. However, I was hit with a foul odor of something rotting as soon as I arrived in the kitchen. I looked around to see what could be the cause of the smell, and I found that the basement door was cracked open. I went to close it, but the curiosity got the best of me. So I called Austin to help me investigate. We darted down the stairs to the basement, clenching our noses at that horrible smell. It was dark until Austin found a light switch and quickly flicked it on. However, we had to regret our decision instantly after we saw the inside of the basement. There were people hanging from hooks with random limbs missing. As we were standing in horror, Austin clenched my shirt strongly. I could see the piles of feces and human remains contained within certain sections of the room. But the most disturbing and disgusting sight of all was the cage in the dark right corner of the room. The inside of it seemed to be a person sleeping at first, but as it looked up, I quickly realized that thing was not a person. What is that? Austin shouted, shaking with fear. I ignored his question. To be more specific, I couldn't answer. That thing was indescribably frightening. It looked like a deformed human with its mouth filled with crooked and ragged teeth covering a majority of its face. Its face pointed outward with creases where the nose should be. The eyes were bulging out of its head as it fixated its glance toward Austin and me. Food, it said to us slowly with excitement and a malicious voice. Then it started clawing at the iron bars of the cage with its needle-like hands. I sat there in horror until Austin grabbed my wrist. We ran up the stairs scrambling for the escape and shut the door. After I made sure it was perfectly locked, I saw Austin sitting on the carpet floor with his knees to his chest. Once we had a few moments of silence, I then finally realized what really happened to my mom and those missing people in our town. At that instant, Austin muttered like this. Your dad, he was beating those people to that thing. Now, what should I do now?
Live life at fiber fast speed. With seamless, whole home.
It was one night. I was drinking out with my two friends when we...
Now, what should I do now?
It was one night. I was drinking out with my two friends when we left the bar after drinking and chattering for a long time. The last bus had left already. Well, I guess we have to stay a night somewhere, one of my friends told me, and we had no choice but to stop at the motel and sleep together. We lay side by side in bed, and it was about 2 hours after that everyone became quiet. The one who was sleeping in the middle suddenly woke me up with a frightened face. Hey, let's get out of here right now, she said. What? We just lied down, I grumbled. But she said this again and again in haste. Please, let's go. I'll tell you the reason later. If you want to stay here, then I'll leave alone. I felt something uneasy about her reaction, so I woke up and shook another friend's shoulder lying next to me. But he didn't wake up no matter how many times I woke him up. Since we were all drunk and couldn't communicate properly with each other, I finally decided to go back with her first, leaving him in the motel. While I was just killing my time at a convenience store nearby until the time of the first bus, my cell phone suddenly rang. It was a phone call from him who was at the motel. Wasn't he sleeping? Thinking like that, I answered the phone and he screamed at once. Why do you guys leave me alone in that room? Oh no, he must have seen it too, she muttered blankly. Later, my friend said that they saw something in the room. As one of my friends felt thirsty during sleeping, she woke up and went to the refrigerator to get some water. And at that moment, a woman with long hair her face was covered with blood. She heard a voice from her that seemed to appeal to something, but she couldn't understand what it meant. Her body was so stiff that she couldn't move, as if she had been paralyzed. However, the moment she turned her eyes, the woman disappeared and she was finally able to move again. Early that day, I joined with my boyfriend and went home right away, but I couldn't get rid of my uncomfortable feeling. And I couldn't get over it until the next day around noon. So we ended up heading back to the motel to complain to the custodian. However, the police and police cars were crowded around the hotel when we got there. We found the custodian in front of the hotel entrance and approached him. What's going on here? Anyway, I'd like to tell you that we are very upset and unpleasant that we'd seen something here yesterday. While I was explaining about this, his gloomy face was slowly contorted, and he slowly opened his mouth when I finished talking. There was a woman who was killed last night in another room after being hit on the head by a baseball bat. The room where she died was the one right above where we were asleep yesterday. And my friend saw a woman's ghost in the ceiling almost at the same time as the woman was killed. The moment we heard the story, we got goosebumps and came back home hurriedly. The moment she died, she might have wanted to show up to ask us for help desperately. That's what I think to this day.
Back in 2016, my friend Lachlan and I thought about doing the best prank ever. It's the ghost girl walking through the streets prank. I went to some Halloween store where they sell the white dress that's the perfect fit for Lachlan. Then I got some red paint for fake blood for the white dress and a long wig for covering Lachlan's face. After buying the stuff, I went home to set it up. Lachlan tried on the whole costume, and I thought it was pretty scary. Scary enough to scare my friends, at least. These other two friends are Jesse and Gavin. Now it was time to set the plan into motion. I called the two of them and told them to meet each other in the car, then come pick me up so we could drive around that night, around 10 p.m. They agreed and hung up. It was 8 p.m. at the time. The perfect time, in fact, to take Lachlan in his costume to the scary bridge that no one drives through anymore. It took us about half an hour to get there. I dropped Lachlan off on the scary bridge, telling him, "When you see the light of their car, walk all creepy like a ghost girl. See you when we're done." I drove back to the house and waited until Jesse and Gavin arrived, and I hopped in their car. I asked Jesse, who was driving, "Hey man, can I drive tonight?" He replied, "Sure, why not?" He let me in the driver's seat, and we took off. Now this is where the fun begins. I make my way to the same street where I drove to drop Lachlan off on the scary bridge. But things get weird here. I must have driven about 20 minutes when I saw Lachlan walking on the road. He wasn't on the bridge, but the road. All Jesse and Gavin saw was a creepy, ghost-looking girl walking on the road. They were practically begging me to drive away now. I told them, "Wait, I need to text Lachlan about this." I texted him, "Hey dude, why are you 10 minutes away from the bridge and walking on the road?" A few seconds later, Lachlan texted back. He said, "What do you mean? I'm at the bridge waiting for y'all. Where are you anyway?" My heart sank when I read that. Quickly, I texted back, "Wait there, I'm picking you up. We're not doing this anymore." So, Lachlan was 10 minutes away. Who was in this costume? What are the odds that it's another prankster in the same outfit? Jesse and Gavin were still begging me to go back. I told them, "We need to go past this prankster." Jesse shouted, "No way!" I ignored him, and I began to drive past whoever was in the same costume. I drove slowly and steadily. When I passed the person, I got a glimpse of their face. I couldn't breathe. What I saw was either the most realistic-looking makeup, or that was not a costume. I drove faster now, knowing that I had to pick Lachlan up, but tempted to just drive away. 10 minutes later, I made it to the bridge where Lachlan was waiting. He was just sitting on a rock waiting for me. I honked at him and he came in. Lachlan asked me what was going on. Now everyone needed an answer. I told Lachlan what happened, and I told Jesse and Gavin about the prank we had planned. It was supposed to be a prank for you guys, but it was interrupted. I began to drive back, dreadfully knowing we'd have to pass the same stretch of road where we saw that girl. But 10 minutes later, when we should have been seeing her, she wasn't there. But I wasn't going to ask why. I just wanted to get home safely. 20 minutes after that, we got back home okay. We all talked about what happened. After the conversation, Jesse and Gavin headed home. Lachlan stayed the night, which was probably for the better. Because what we saw that night made me lose sleep and terrified me for months.
Food, essentials, deliveries, sulit.
It's a summer of deals.
This incident happened when I was around 10 years old. I lived in a small village. There were about 100 people in the town, and there was a lady who used to live next door. She was a very kind person. She used to bake cookies to give us, bring flowers sometimes. I mean, everybody in the town loved her. Until one day she went missing. All the neighbors tried to look for her. We even reported to the police to make a search for her, but she was never found anywhere after that. She had been missing for years, and there had been rumors around the town that she had committed suicide. However, I didn't believe those rumors, because I knew that she would never do such a thing. A few years later, I became 16, and I was playing with my friends one day. We found that there was a storage container while we were hanging around the town. To be specific, it had been there since I was 10, but I never wanted to open it since it stank of something rotten so badly. "Hey, can you open that door?" One of my friends started to tease me, and as a stupid teenager, I didn't want to be a loser, so I decided my mind. It was really hard to open when I grabbed the door, but I tried strongly. And when the door had opened, what I found at that moment still creeps me out to this day. There she was. The blood was spread in all directions. She had no eyeballs. All the organs were empty, and the maggots were crawling on her body everywhere. It was literally awful. Smelling inside stench, I cried and called my parents, and they immediately called the police. After that, the police started a huge investigation again, and they eventually detected who it was. Turned out, it was a man who was living in our village. The police told my parents that she was murdered that night when all the neighbors tried to find her. I'm glad the criminal was arrested finally, but I still can't stop thinking about her death to this day. I feel sorry for her. I hope she can rest in peace.